We're going to bring up Nathan quick for a few minutes here. One of our fabulous sponsors helping us make all this possible.
Hello,
there he is.
Hey, hey.
How are you, sir? All right, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right, great. Let me share my screen here and go from there.
There you go.
Cool. All right. Hey, everybody. It's really great to be here today. So I'm Nathan from the Kirschbaum team. And, you know, I actually can't tell you how happy we as a company are to be sponsors here at Laracon. And just to be in the Laravel community is really amazing. It's actually been a pretty wild week for us. You know, in addition to kind of, you know, sponsoring Laracon and being involved in that way, we also launched a complete rebrand of our company. So you may have noticed the new logo, the new website. Actually, kind of some fun stuff there. We actually the website's using Vapor, so that's kind of cool. Oh, actually, if you guys want to do a fun experiment, everyone should head over there and like smash the refresh button about 20 or 30 times, and we'll see how that goes. Kind of a joke, but if you do it, I will show the analytics if there's anything interesting there. But more seriously, you know, I just wanted to take this time to talk actually a little bit about how Laravel has a potential to change lives. I think that's an important note. And I think, you know, we all know that it can change people's lives in terms of the software that we create. But it actually has a pretty big impact on the people side of things too. So I want to just remind everyone of that. It's one of the things I'm most grateful for. Yeah. So, you know, I actually think it's changed my life a lot. And it changed the lives of a lot of people in my company and the like network that we've built over, you know, over the last 6 years. So you know, it's really quite incredible. In fact, I was a freelancer at first. And, you know, well, we have 18 employees now, 16 of which are developers, by the way. I actually just was a freelancer when I first ran into Laravel, and I happened to be sitting next to a guy in an airplane that was like hacking away at Laravel. I think it was probably Laravel 4.1 or 4.2 at the time, 4.2. But I, like, for 4 hours straight, I was just like mesmerized by this thing, and we were hacking on it together the whole plane flight. It was really cool. And I basically decided, like, I'm going to transition to doing that. This is amazing. It just like felt so good, made so much sense, simple, right? So you know, that's where it started for me. And like over the course, like I've been involved in a lot of different communities, and this one is it's just amazing. Like the people in this community, what the different things people are doing and what we get out of it as individuals. It's just incredible. We've built some amazing things together, and we just want to thank you all for that. So as you probably noticed, there's a slide up. We decided to give a couple of iPads away and some pairing sessions. I think we're going to give 10 pairing sessions away. It could be used for like open source stuff if you want our help, or honestly anything. It can be used whatever you want. They're like 1 hour pairing sessions. You could even break it up a little if you want. That's fine. But we're also, one of the things we noticed over the last year was that we built like a pretty big network. I'd never intended to like make a business or anything. This just kind of like, I don't know, just kind of unfolded naturally. And like, it's a little crazy. Like I think our Slack, you know, even though there's only 18 of us, I think our Slack account has like 160 people in it right now, just because we just keep meeting all these awesome people and doing all this stuff. And we have all these like connections to the community. And we thought to ourselves, like, you know, over the next 6 months, like let's start to take what we have internally, what makes us so happy as people and as developers, and let's start to share that more. So in addition to kind of putting your hat in the ring for some of these, you know, fun giveaways, more importantly, if you want to hear more about what we have, you know, plans for the future, consider either signing up for that, or if you don't like those types of things, just shoot me an email. Because we're going to be doing some interesting stuff around pair programming, professional development, mentoring, open source funding opportunities. We're going to be funding some open source projects this year. People who aren't well known in the community who want to be doing interesting things. We have some network referral benefits and community surveys. Anyway, lots of stuff going on. Would love to talk to you guys about it more. Thank you so much, and enjoy Adam's presentation.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Nathan. Yeah, I mean, just to second that, absolutely, Laravel's just obviously touched a lot of people's lives, and that's something that we don't always pay enough attention to when you're, all the tech is so interesting and the feature announcements and everything like that. But yeah, just, I mean, certainly my life has been impacted hugely by it, as well as, everybody here today and everybody watching. So excellent point. And thanks a lot. Thanks for sponsoring.
Take care.
Thanks. Okay. Wathan. Here he comes. Hey.
I'm here.
Hey.
I was waiting for you to do that, or if it was up to me.
You're looking sharp, man. Looking sharp.
Thanks. I do my best for Laracon,
Nah, that's right.
Got a haircut like 3 months ago for the conference.
All right, man. Well, I'll let you do your thing. Good luck.
Okay. Do I share my screen manually? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Let me get the old Zoom stuff over on another monitor here so I can kind of do my thing. And yep, ready to go.
Do it. Yep, and we see
all
it.
Right.
You're good.
We're all good? All right.
Yep.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to my Laracon talk. My name is Adam. I make CSS stuff. And today I am going to talk to you about sort of some guiding principles and ideas I like to keep in mind myself when I'm sort of building components with Tailwind CSS. So let's look at some code. That's kind of what we usually do here. So here we've got like a design. This is something that Steve designed for Tailwind UI that we kind of built out, and it's a cool little home screen example. And if you look at how this code is written right now, it's just one giant file full of utility classes. Like there's a couple loops in here and stuff for looping over like some data, like for these lists, but nothing is extracted at all. It's just like a bunch of utilities all just like in one big mess of stuff. And I think a common sort of reaction people have when they're sort of deciding to consider Tailwind, or usually just outright rejecting it and saying it's an awful idea, is that people expect that like this is what their code actually looks like when they're working with it day to day, and that there's all this duplication and it's hard to maintain and stuff like that. But the reality is like Tailwind is just a set of really low level building blocks, and you should be using it to sort of build more interesting abstractions for your own application. We just can't really provide those abstractions because if we did, the framework would be too opinionated and every site would look the same. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that process today, and just kind of share some of my ideas around it, and hopefully teach you a thing or two. So I kind of had this idea to structure this talk from like sort of simple ideas to like more complex ideas. So the arc of the story is going to start here. So let's talk about some of the small-brained componentization moves first. So if you look at what we have here in the browser, I think a common place to start that I think is like sensible, especially if you're starting with this big thing first, is to sort of like break it up into like slightly smaller things, right? So I think a lot of people would look like over here, there's like this column, there's like this big chunk here, there's this chunk here, and then there's maybe like the nav bar. To me, those are like the four most like identifiable pieces. So one thing that you can do to sort of just make things a little bit more manageable is cut that stuff up. So I thought it would be useful to talk a little bit about how I would do that and show what it kind of looks like after. So the first thing I think that's worth talking about is a lot of people I think would take like this element or maybe even this element, maybe, yeah, probably this element or this element, and they would stick that into like a component, a Vue component or a React component is kind of what I'm talking about in this case, or a Blade component would work too. My personal opinion is that this is not the right element to extract. This contains like all the surrounding white space and sort of layout information. To me, the piece that you want to extract is this thing, the thing that is just kind of like goes right to the edges of the content, because this you can kind of drop into something else and kind of control the external spacing there. So it's a little bit more flexible. This one in the middle is a little bit different because it has like these edge-to-edge borders. So it's not quite as simple to extract like a really tight version. But in this case, I would probably extract this element here. So you can see if I delete this, sort of the slot for it still remains. That's kind of like how I'm thinking about this stuff. And then similarly over here, I wouldn't keep like this padding built into it, you know, like these green areas here. I would be grabbing this element, the stuff that I can delete it and I could put in some other content and the padding would still sort of stay the same. That's kind of how I think about this. So I want to show you what that kind of looks like. This talk, I'm going to be doing a bunch of live coding, but also a lot of sort of just like looking at static code because there's just too many ideas to cover in a 25-minute talk if you have to watch me like slowly go through everything. So what I've done is I've created like a componentized version, and it's not fully all the way done because I wanted to keep it sort of like comprehensible, but it kind of contains the parts that I think are interesting, the parts we're going to talk about. So compare this dashboard, which is like this giant one, to what we have after a little bit of componentization. So we've extracted like a nav bar, a dashboard header, and the dashboard header in this case is what I'm calling this piece, because even though on like the biggest screens it looks like this little column, conceptually it really is like the header of the dashboard. It's just sort of the layout that makes it not. So we've extracted that, extracted the project list and the activity feed. And these are sort of extracted at those boundaries that I talked about. Internally, these are not really that interesting, right? There's like a dashboard header. It's literally the same HTML we were looking at before. It accepts like the user as a prop and spits out some information about them. But really all we've done here is sort of reorganize the code. We haven't really done anything in terms of like designing any interesting APIs or thinking about how things communicate in any interesting way, which is why I kind of consider this sort of like the bottom of the barrel componentization technique. Not that there's a better technique, but this is like not an interesting one, you know? It's a useful tool to have, but it's pretty simple. The most interesting part about what we've done here probably is that we've created this separate component here for the dashboard layout. Now, I think something a lot of people might do is they would just take like this nav bar and just like cut it out and then like put the nav bar in here and do the same thing for the other stuff, but still sort of leave all these like layout details in here and still have a bit of a messy component. I like this approach of taking like creating like a dedicated sort of layout component. And all that does is kind of hide away all those annoying, noisy details about how to create the columns and how they should work together. And then just expose some slots. So there's where like the nav bar goes in. The left column is where that dashboard header goes. The center column is where the project list goes. And the right column is where the activity feed goes. So this sort of lets you extract all those details away too, so that at the end of the day, like your sort of top level component is just, okay, I'm going to pick the layout. I'm going to sort of fill in that layout with the blocks that I need, and then I'm going to pass them their data. So this dashboard is still the same as the other one in the sense of right now I have all this just like hard coded data that feeds into it, right? Like in a real application, this is going to come from a data source somewhere, but we can imagine that this like setup block is that data source. So that's kind of like the first thing that I wanted to talk about is basically just sort of breaking things apart so that they're a little bit easier to focus on, but not doing anything super interesting in terms of API design, other than maybe this dashboard layout, which I think is kind of interesting. So let's talk about phase 2. So now the brain is starting to see some interesting activity. What is the sort of higher end move here? So another piece that I think people run into a lot, like a decision they have to make, is how to deal with things like buttons, right? That's kind of like a low level component that you want to be able to reuse throughout your application. So I thought I would share some ideas I have around how I design buttons as components that are sort of powered under the hood by Tailwind. And even things like this little like status indicator, for example. So if we head over to sort of the original layout here and we look for maybe like new project, here's sort of the markup. This, including the span, is the button. People ask me about this a lot, by the way, like why do I do a wrapper span around buttons, especially in Tailwind UI? The reason is because we have this shadow on the span, but we also have like a focus shadow on the button itself, right over here. And if we just like changed the drop shadow to this shadow on focus, this shadow would actually just get overridden and would disappear. So by stacking them with like another element, you sort of get to see that shadow underneath, which is kind of nice. So anyways, yeah, here you can see like these two buttons, right? And they're basically the same. I've organized it by like the first half is everything that's the same. And then once you get to like here, that's when they start being different. So everything before that is mostly structural sizing related stuff. And then it's all like color related stuff. So I'll show you what the extracted components sort of look like for this. So if we head over to sort of like the finished dashboard and then like kind of dig into the dashboard header, you can see all I've done here is introduce like a button component, capital B, so that it's like a component and not an HTML element, and it's got a color prop. So the first one is an indigo button and the next one is a white button, right? And that kind of matches like what we're looking at in the design. So let's take a look at that code for a second so I can talk through some of the decisions. So here you can see sort of like the base markup, right? It's the same for everything. And I've got a color prop coming in and I'm sort of like validating that it can only be indigo or white. We've sort of like defined an explicit API. I think something that a lot of people I've seen do that I think is like not a great idea is they'll allow you to sort of pass in any color. Let's pull up in this dashboard header and the button so we can see them both here. Like pass in any color at all. And then when they're like generating the class string, they'll just like do fancy stuff like BG color 600, right? And obviously they'd use a template string here instead. Couple reasons that I think this is a bad idea. One is sort of more important than another, but first, a technical reason. With Tailwind, it's really important that you use a tool like Purge CSS to remove all the unused styles, or you're going to end up with a really huge CSS file. And we've sort of just like embraced that that's part of the build step. That's part of the workflow at this point. If you write your classes this way, it's unpurgeable. Because Purge CSS is going to look at this string. It's not going to evaluate your JavaScript and know what values could possibly be passed into color. So it's actually going to remove a bunch of classes that you need, which can lead to subtle production bugs. So that's sort of a technical reason. You could make the argument that we shouldn't like be changing the way we write code because of like technical limitations. And I would agree with that, which is why I think the second reason is actually more important, which is that if you look at these two buttons, they don't actually have enough in common to even like extract anything like that. So this is BG Indigo 600. This is just BG White, not BG White 600. On Hover, we go to BG Indigo 500. On Hover here, we don't have a background color change at all. We change the text color, which we don't change here. So in practice, in something that I think is like well-designed visually, there's not as much like just sort of like mathematical consistency between things the way you'd expect. It's not just like a mechanical find and replace. Like things are thought out independently. So it makes much more sense to me to have sort of a constrained enumerated API where you can sort of specify these are all the color related classes for indigo. These are all the color related classes for white. And then down here we have base classes, which is just like a list of all the classes that are the same in all of them. So this is sort of a simple example. You might also want to support like passing in like a size prop or something, right? And maybe someone could specify like a medium size or a large size or a small size. And then this base classes thing would have to get broken up. You'd pull out all the things that were relating to size, which is probably like padding, font size, leading. And you'd build like another map like this, where SM would map to maybe like PX3 and PY1. Then MD would map to like PX4, PY2, that sort of thing. So that's how I would go about sort of like expanding on this. And then like the API might look like this, you know? It'd all be enumerated stuff. So I think the point that I'm trying to make here the most is that just because you're sort of building something with Tailwind, it doesn't mean that like everywhere that someone is trying to style something has to like look like you're styling it with Tailwind. Tailwind can just be sort of like the implementation detail under the hood, and you can expose more constrained sort of expressive APIs like this. And this is kind of the way that I personally like to do it. So you can see we've also done this in like the project list. We've got like a button here for filters, and then we've got another button for the sorting here. And interesting point about the sorting one is it's got an SVG in it, like an icon. And you'll see there's a little bit of a negative margin on the left of the SVG to sort of pull it over to sort of get it visually balanced. A lot of people would look at that and think, oh, that's kind of gross. Like, I don't want negative margins. Like, they feel like an anti-pattern or something. If you want less padding there, you should just put less padding there. I think negative margins here is actually a great solution, because the whole reason we need less padding is because the icon needs to move over. So by baking the the sort of spacing alteration into the SVG by commenting out the SVG. And actually, let's just jump to the sort of refactored version of this for a second so I can like make changes like this. Uh-oh, what have we done? Dashboard.view. Did I make a typo here? Completed dashboard.view. Okay. Let's not worry about that. Let's stick with the old one. Okay. The idea is that like by deleting this SVG, now the button looks exactly the same as it did before. It doesn't have like smaller padding on the side, you know? So that's just something I like to keep in mind. How am I doing for time here? Okay, kind of going slow. I do need to sort of figure out this thing. This is like a annoying little thing that probably is just like a...
I think it's just supposed to be complete, isn't it?
Oh, complete. Oh, dude, you're a legend. You're a landsman. Oh, man, you got me all under pressure here, you know, like tiny little things. So anyways, yeah, okay, now we're good. So now we can do all sorts of stuff. Cool. So that's kind of like the button stuff. If you check out this like status indicator, this is a similar sort of thing. So if we look at the old one where we have, there's probably like inactive somewhere. So this is just like a span with like an ARIA label. It's got some dynamic classes for like the focus ring or sort of the glow and then like the inner circle. The API for the finished one is very similar to the other one, except instead of doing like a color-based thing, I've just done like a status-based thing, which is another way that you can go, sort of using something that's a little bit more like semantic. And internally, this really just looks like the same as the other one, you know? We've got, this time we've got some classes for the ring and for the dot that we sort of have to apply, and we look them up based on the status that gets passed in. But otherwise, it's like, it's the same sort of approach. Okay, let's see. That's kind of that step. I could talk about more, but only 25 minutes, so we gotta be quick here. So let's talk about another one. So now, whoa, we're starting to get to big brain territory here in terms of like some ideas, stuff that I'm a little bit more opinionated about. So check out this design here. You'll see in the nav bar, we've got like documentation, support, and then a drop down with a few links in it, right? And then on the old mobile view here, it's like the same thing, the same 3 links, you know, but it's kind of set up differently. I think a lot of people would attempt to perform some truly like CSS gymnastics to reuse all these elements as the same links here. And it can be done, but I don't do that. So I want to talk a little bit about why. So if we head over to the nav bar, we'll look at the old nav bar. So let's find like sign out. So you'll see here's like the drop down that contains like the links. And then here's like the documentation and support links. So this is like the desktop view. And then the mobile view is down here. We duplicate documentation, support, your profile settings, sign out. And people will say like, this is terrible. What if you want to change one of those links? Now you have to change it in 2 places, or you're sending extra markup down to the client. Valid concerns. Let's talk about the trade-offs and how you can sort of avoid as much of it as possible. Here's what I've done here. In the nav bar, let's deal with the duplication concern first. So what I've done is I've taken information about like the navigation and I've moved it out into just like a data source that feeds into the nav bar. So we've got primary links and secondary links. So this is just like the label and then like the actual URL. So now in the view, we can just like loop over those, right? So now if we want to change one in one place, it's fine. Like if we change this to like poop, and then we head back over here, we should with any luck see poop, and then poop. You know, we didn't have to like make sure we remembered to change it in both places. So just using like a single source of truth is a way to avoid that problem. Now, the duplicated markup thing is a real thing. Whether you consider it an issue or not, I personally don't, but I want to talk about why I actually see it as like a benefit. So if you try to like do a lot of gymnastics to make this work, then on like this element, like here where you're like listing like the links, you would have a crazy amount of stuff that's just like super coupled to both views. You'd have all these weird breakpoint classes that like don't make sense when you're just looking at them until you like look at it on the mobile view. And I don't know how many of you have tried to build things this way. It's like, it's such a tug of war between trying to get something working in mobile without breaking something in desktop. It's just like so frustrating. By breaking them apart, you don't have that concern anymore. You can make changes to the desktop layout without having any impact on the mobile layout. You can even go so far as to like replace the mobile menu with a completely different one without touching the desktop one. So check this out. Here we've got a simple mobile menu. I've kind of prepared another one here. We can grab this like flyover menu. And if I just like paste that in here and comment out this one, now we've got this like fancy like popover menu. And all I had to do was delete the old mobile menu and paste in the new one. Like I didn't touch any of this markup at all. So that freedom to sort of develop them like in like a focused way is worth a lot to me personally. So that's how I kind of think about that sort of stuff. Do not be afraid to duplicate markup, in my opinion. All right, let's see. What do we got next? Okay. We're entering galaxy brain mode. So two examples I want to talk about here that almost like seem like small and not that exciting on their own, but are actually like pretty interesting concepts. So first one, let's go back here and we'll go back to the old version of the dashboard for a second. Make sure that's all working. Check out the repetition here between like this component, this component, this component, this component. So we've got like an icon with a bit of text and it's got like some consistent sort of font weight and styling and stuff. Interesting bit is that this is just text. This is a link and the styles are a little bit different because it has like some hover styles. So I want to talk a little bit about how I would create an abstraction around this that is like ergonomic and kind of fun to work with. I'm going to try and do this from scratch instead of just showing you a finished one. So let's find like the text pro member here and we'll like work on it. Okay, so my thinking for this component, like I tossed around a bunch of names and the best one I could come up with is like icon badge. I've got an implementation over here in case I screw this up that we can fall back to. But say we have like an icon badge here, like, and we're just designing the API here just to see like what it would feel like to do. I think a lot of people might do something like, okay, let's set the icon to be like badge check, you know, since that's like the icon that we're using here. And then maybe for the text, we'll say like pro member, right? And I think this is fine, but I think it is, it's not the way that we think about like writing HTML normally. Usually like stuff that goes into like data attributes isn't really like stuff that is affecting the HTML. And of course, like we do that with component libraries and stuff a lot. But personally, I kind of like being able to write it like this, you know? So as an experiment, I wanted to see like, what would it look like to try and write this component in a way where we could pass in the SVG and like the text just as like children, the sort of way that you might write like HTML, right? Now, the thing that makes this an interesting challenge is that there's some styles that we have to add to the icon and some styles that we have to add to the text. And of course, like we don't want to have to duplicate that every time because that sort of defeats the purpose of the abstraction, right? So I want to show you like what it would look like to create this component. So we'll just kind of like keep this here and let's create a new file here. So I'm going to call this icon badge.view. We're going to write this as a render function. And I'll show you kind of what we're going to do. So the reason I want to write it as a render function is because it has to support both link styles and spans. And it's hard in Vue to just like change an element to be another element without writing a render function, usually. You can do it with if statements, but it ends up creating duplication and stuff that's kind of annoying. So what we're going to do is we're going to import Vue's kind of render helper thing here. And we're going to receive some props. And we're going to receive some our slots. And then we want to return something that renders some stuff. So let's just do like a very simple example for a second and just prove that we can just like render anything. So this is just like a hello world. Let's just save this. We'll go and import that component down here. So we're just going to grab icon badge, badge. And let's just see like what happened. Okay, good start, right? We've got hello world rendering. So interesting thing to note here is that we're not rendering the children at all. We're just saying, yeah, all this does is render hello world, end of story. So let's just grab this for a second and bring it in here so we can sort of like reference it and kind of copy it, right? Okay, so if we want to render a span with like some classes, we can just grab these classes, add them as an attribute here, and then we have to render some children. So what we want to render is the icon that came in and the span that came in, but we want to render them with like some extra classes added to them, right? So first, let's just grab them. Here's a kind of a clever way to do it using just like array sort of destructuring. So we can just grab like the icon in the text, I guess, by doing like slots.default and just like grabbing the slots out. So in theory, we should be able to do this and see something. So we get pro member. You don't see an icon, but I think it's just because the icon has no classes. So let's try and add the classes. So we can do this by pulling in clone vnode. So this is kind of getting view specific. I know, but you can apply these same things in React and in other places too. I just thought it was a fun demo. So this is what you do. We'll call clone vnode, and then we can pass through some like props or attributes to merge. So let's just add some classes to that too. So we'll do like a class for that one, and then we'll clone the text too and do the same thing. So let's see what we've got now. So there we go. So now we've got this kind of API where we can like pass in the real icon and the real text as like DOM nodes, but override the classes and stuff and kind of keep that information encapsulated inside there, which is kind of neat. I don't want to waste more time showing like the link implementation. Instead, why don't we just like look at the finished one and I can explain it a little bit. So in the finished one, we also take an href prop. So if you head over to like the dashboard header and we look for icon badge, you'll see here's a use case or sort of an instance of it where we've passed through a URL. And when we do that, what we're doing is we're just checking, okay, well, if there is an href passed through, then we want to make it a link. Otherwise, we make it a span. We attach the href to the root element. And if it's undefined, this will just come through as nothing. And then down here, we say, well, if there's a link, then we have to add these group hover styles. Otherwise, we add nothing. And we do that for both. So this is how we can sort of create like one component that works as a link or a span just based on that one prop, which is kind of cool. Okay, I got like probably 8 minutes or so we can get through a couple more things. So one other thing that I think falls into the same sort of brain level of things that I'd like to talk about is let's go back to rendering the complete one for a second. So check out this component up here. It's got like some text and some buttons, and you'll see like when we get to this point, this is realistic, by the way. This is like an iPhone SE, like the old one anyways. You can see like we've kind of broken out of the padding and we're sort of bleeding off the page at this point, right? So it's just like a responsive design problem. So I want to talk about 2 ways to solve this problem and just like an underlying principle that I think is kind of important. So you might think to just solve this problem using just breakpoints, right? So let's check out the section heading, which is the class that, or sort of the component that kind of handles this. It's got a slot for the heading and a slot for the actions. So we could just do something like this. We could just say, only make it flex on small screens, otherwise like make it block by default. And then we could say maybe add like MT3, SM, MT0 sort of thing. And now, yeah, now they're stacked on mobile and side by side here. And that's fine. But like, see how early that wraps? It wraps like way earlier than it needs to. And then consider another situation. Consider like we wanted to use this component in like this column. You would need it to wrap way earlier, right? Because the column is much narrower. So this is where people want like element queries or container queries in CSS. So you can sort of change the layout of something without basing it on like the size of the viewport. But we don't have those. And until we have those, we have to look for other sort of ways to do it. So the point I want to make is I think something we should strive to do whenever possible, although the threshold for abandoning this is quite low, admittedly, is strive to make things like responsive without using media queries so that they can adapt to their context better. So if we can make something adapt to its context without thinking about the viewport, we should. So I want to show you a technique for doing that, 2 techniques actually. So the fundamental principle for solving this here is we need to add flex wrap, okay? So if we add flex wrap, now it will wrap when necessary. But see how like there's like no space there, and there's also no space here. So you might think, okay, well, let's just go here and we'll do like ML3, MT2 or something, right? Or maybe 3, I don't know. And now we've got like the space above, but now we've got this extra space on the side. And that space is what we want here, but not what we want here. And here, well, now it's like misaligned. So the secret to this, getting this wrapping thing to work, is to sort of put these on every element so that they sort of line up. So now you can see they line up, right? For both vertically and to the left. But if you look here, we've actually got like extra space here. So you can see how if we look at this element here, it's got like margin on the outside, which we don't want. Same with this one on the left. So we can counter that with negative margin on the parent. So we can say negative ML3, negative MT3. And now we've got something that's like perfectly adaptable and just wraps as needed. And the actual component itself still doesn't take up any extra space. You can see like the padding comes right to the content. There's a better way to do this that's going to be possible to use soon, but we can't really use right now, unless you don't care about supporting Safari, which is using the gap property. So gap kind of traditionally only worked in CSS Grid, but now it's coming to Flexbox. So we could just say like gap 3 here. And now we get literally the same behavior with like one class. The problem is it only works in Firefox and Chrome right now. But this is like going to be such a game changer. This is going to make it so easy to do so many cool things. So that's kind of like a trick that I wanted to show you, something to think about. You don't always have to use media queries to make things sort of adapt. Okay, so on that note, I want to show you one last thing, which I'll try and be quick through, which is sort of the multiverse brain mode. And this is just me sort of experimenting with an interesting idea that I wanted to share and see how far we can push things and see what people think. So this whole idea of making things adaptable without media queries sounds great, right? But of course it falls apart pretty fast. So like if you look at this dashboard header component, it has all these classes baked into it around like, let's look at just like these buttons, for example. You can see there's all this like SM space X3, XL flex call stuff, right? Basically, it has to know that it's being used in a context where it needs to switch back to the stacked layout on XL screens because its available space has been drastically reduced. So even though we've extracted this as a component, it's tightly coupled to the layout that it's being used in. And if we threw 2 instances of them on the page, and this is kind of an interesting way to sort of demo the issue here. Say we threw like, I don't know, say we put like Emmet has been not working properly with view 3 for me. Say we just like threw another instance of it here under the nav. See how this goes like full width, even though it totally doesn't need to because it has all this space. So I've been experimenting with an idea for solving this by kind of putting the information about what layout to use in the right place, but still making this component blind to the consuming context. So I was going to do this live, but I don't think I have time. So I think we should just kind of jump to the finished one. So you might have noticed this dashboard header magic over on the side here, right? So first, let's look at the dashboard header for a sec. Here's kind of what I was talking about, right? We have like a bunch of styles here, then small screen styles, then XL screen styles. And really the XL is actually the same as the default here, because it starts at a stacked layout, then goes horizontal, then goes stacked again. And this same sort of concept appears a few times in this component. Like here's another spot where there's the stacked classes, there's the horizontal classes, there's the stacked classes again, and it's coupled, right? We don't want this to work this way. So let's check out dashboard heading magic for a second. We'll just switch this over to magic. And do I have something I can just copy to do this quickly? Yeah. So here's like the magic version. So I'll explain this a little bit. So I've added this extra prop called layout. And the layout is telling the dashboard header, by default, I want you to use your stacked layout. On small screens and up, I want you to use the horizontal layout. And on extra large screens, I'm wanting to use the stacked layout. So what I'm trying to do here is extract the knowledge about like what layout needs to be used at what screen size to sort of this big layout component, the place that actually like should be allowed to know about that. And then the internals here, I've written this little tricky helper function that I'm not going to explain, but it's the principle of it that matters the most. Basically, I'm saying dynamically add some classes to this element. When I'm supposed to be shown as a stacked layout, show these classes, and I'll explain this sort of screen prefix in a second. And when I'm supposed to be shown in a horizontal layout, add these classes. And what that helper function is doing is it's taking the incoming information, which is like the SM horizontal, and it's saying, okay, if I'm supposed to be horizontal on small screens, then I'm going to add classes like SM spacewise 0, SM flex, SM justify between. So it's adding all the right responsive classes, but it doesn't have that like embedded in it. It doesn't know which ones to use when. They get passed in from a parent. And we do that in the 3 places where it matters in this component. And now if we head back to the browser here, you'll see like it still works the same way, right? But check out what happens if I grab this other snippet down here and I paste this up under the nav bar. Now I've created another instance of the dashboard header where it doesn't revert to the stacked layout and Excel screens, it just stays horizontal. And now you can see I've got 2 instances of the same component on screen at the same time using different responsive layouts, which is not possible if you bake in all the media query stuff directly into the component. So this is sort of an idea that I'm playing with. It's sort of like a way to mimic element queries that feels like pretty simple and not like complicated to me. The only challenge is getting it to work with Purge CSS, but I have a prototype in Tailwind in a branch right now that lets you sort of scan for these sorts of strings. And if it sees like screen, it'll generate all the screen sizes for block. Same with this, so that they'll all work. So this is an idea that I think is like kind of untested in production in a lot of ways. You know, it's just something I'm playing with, but it's me just trying to figure out like, how can I solve this problem of making components not have to know about where they're being used, because that makes components harder to maintain and harder to sort of develop in isolation and harder to just like use in multiple contexts. So that's an idea that I'm playing with. That's sort of like the galaxy brain moment, like the craziest thing I can think to do with some of this componentization stuff. Lots of other stuff that we could talk about, but it's a 25-minute talk, so I thought I would just cover some of the highlights and some of the things I'm thinking about now. Hope it was useful. Hope you learned a thing or two or picked up a good trick. And other than that, that's the end. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Really good stuff, man.
Thank you.
Negative margins all over. I love it. This is like my kind of conference here.
Yeah, that's the way to do it.
All right. Thanks a lot, Adam.
Thanks. Yeah.